I dropped out for dinner.
Oh, I got it just down. They're awesome, they're so smart. We're so good. Yeah. Well, they were coming out, I was like, you're coming out that first day.
Yeah.
This is an important
Exactly, there's something. Like a force field out there. They don't know how to love it, stay working.
Actually, Bill.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out today. I think we'll get this started. Oh, sorry. So we'll start with introductions. Because I see a lot of familiar faces, but some new faces. So I'm John Pete, a project manager with FFA Architecture.
Phil Lopez, a project designer with FFA. I'm Rajiv Uli with Rhino Geotechnical. I'm the geotechnical engineer. I'm Ian Gilbert. I'm a partner with FFA. And Chris Mathner with Blockbridge.
So let's see if this will click forward. Or Josh.
Josh is not here.
Okay, yeah. Adult supervision.
Yeah.
Okay.
We did this last time. We did this last time.
Okay.
And I think nothing else can be done.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, again, I appreciate everyone coming out and braving the cold for this meeting because we have a packed agenda. So up first, we're going to go through the geotechnical study. We've been able to go boring on site, know a lot about the soil conditions. So Rhino 1 will give us a summary of the borings. We'll go an update on the community process, what we've been with our previous two meetings and where we're going. And then we do have kind of all the site options summarized from our discussion at the last meeting. So we're going to go through the site options. We're going to talk about the priorities that we heard at the listening session and the range at the last meeting. So run through those. And then basically overlay those on the site options to help us evaluate the scenarios. And then the two activities we have planned is in basically as a group, talk through all the scenarios and come to a conclusion on what the top two recommendations are going to be moving forward. And then we have character envisioning to feel like what is the right development that will be here in Gearhart and make sure the character and design of the building connects with your community goals. So that's our agenda for today. And with that, yeah, I can turn it over to Rhino 1.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the geotechnical conditions on the site. So we drilled a boring here in the middle of November, and you guys probably must have seen it out here. So the boring was drilled right here. the fire station. We went down about 100 feet. So basically, we sample the soils every 5 feet going down. We take samples out, which is called like a standard penetration test, and that tells us the resistance of the soils to loading, to seismic events, and all other kind of good data that it provides us to make some informed decisions on the site itself. Just a quick summary. So based on the boring that we did, and then also looking at the geologic literature out here. So the soils under here are quaternary sand deposits, they're sand dune deposits. And then at depth, we think we hit the siltstone and claystone, which is part of the Astoria Formation. But that's really near the bottom of the boring at about 100 plus minus feet. The groundwater is about 15 feet. It may vary between 15 and 20 feet. Now, one thing that we should also take into consideration is, since we're in the tsunami zone, so there is a scenario where the groundwater could be above the ground here during the subduction zone earthquake and the associated tsunami with that. So basically, this is the data product that we have when we drill a boring. So you have the depths on one side, these SPTs are called the standard penetration test. We record the recoveries, the blow counts, which is basically you have a hammer, 140 pound, and a sampler, which is 2-inch diameter, 18-inch tall, and then we drive that into the ground. And those numbers here, like 13, 11, 14, 32, they tell you how strong or how soft the soil is. And as you can tell, the higher the blow counts, the better it is. So the one interesting thing about this site is that we have soft deposits and we have hard deposits. And then we have soft deposits and hard deposits. So it's not like a uniform soil condition where you have soft soils and then hard soils. And this basically extends down to about 60 plus minus feet, and then we get into some better material. Next one. So our task here was, this particular structure would be designed with the Oregon Structural Specialty Code 2022. And it might be the next version by the time we get through the design process, so the code might change. The ASCE 716 or 722 are the codes which are used by the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, and they refer back to that for the seismic design criteria. I understand that it's a tsunami risk category 4 structure. So we looked at all the recent data on the site, we looked through all the USGS data. And based on that, we figured out that the design earthquake on this site is about a magnitude 9 with a peak ground acceleration of 1.3 G. Now, anything above 0.5 G is a pretty high acceleration for the buildings to sustain. So we did what is called the liquefaction analysis. Basically, what that means is if you got sand and on the beach, if you see the water rises, the sand basically loses strength. So that's what we see here, that as the water comes up and there is shaking, there will be excess water pressure and the sand will basically lose strength. So when it loses strength, we think that the settlement would be on the order of 4 inches. It could be as much as 10 inches. Now, the thing about these numbers are these are orders of magnitude. The science is not there where you can basically say, this will be 2 inches or this will be 20 inches. So these are all order of magnitude numbers that we look at. The bigger concern on this side is the lateral spreading, which is basically how much the ground can move in the horizontal direction. And we have the ocean on one side, we have a creek on the other side. So when we hit the ground with an earthquake of that high of a magnitude, with that high accelerations, the possibility that the ground will move is more detrimental to the buildings and the site than the vertical movements.
So the code that I mentioned specifically say if we have hazard of that magnitude, we cannot use spread footings to support any essential structure. So we have to look into like ground modification or deep foundations. So we did look at deep foundations. The concern with deep foundations is for buildings like this, for bridges, we'll have no concern, we'll go with like a big 10, 12-foot drill shaft and build a massive structure to support a bridge. But for buildings, the amount of the foundation needed kind of makes it cost prohibitive and it becomes uneconomical to do deep foundations for these magnitudes. So what we think is a better option here is to do ground stabilization, which is basically we take a big auger, we drill down, and then we inject cement into the ground and mix the soil in situ. So basically we are mixing the soil and making it a better product as we bring the auger back up. Again, it's not a very, it is more economical than a deep foundation, but it is not a very cheap system either. So this is just a typical layout, and this is based on, the work that we did in Manzanita for their city hall. So we built a similar system out there. The soil conditions there are not as bad as over here, because here we plan to go down to about 60, 65 feet. Over there, we were about 45 feet. And then the area here is probably a lot larger than what we did in Manzanita. So in a nutshell, that's a quick overview of, the geotechnical work, the concerns that we have, and, the couple of remedial options that could be used. Questions?
I do. You're talking about lateral spread. What is the chance of that happening here though?
So now that is let's see, it's a very loaded question. So, so the way that we look at stuff is more on the probabilistic basis. So when you look through the ASCE or the codes and the work that USGS does, so they look at all different kind of seismic scenarios. Now the closest source out here is the Cascadia subduction zone. So the major earthquake here would be the Cascadia subduction zone. And the history has shown that, it's like once every 350 years. Some studies show it is like once every 500 years. So I don't know the answer to that, so.
Okay.
But if we look at the current state of knowledge and the current codes, we are required to design it to that earthquake.
Okay.
So that's that magnitude 8.9 that I showed before. It may not happen in our lifetime or even in the next generation, but at the same time, it could happen twice. The only one that I'm aware of in the recent days was the Alaska earthquake in '64. And then I think the one in Venezuela or somewhere recently started.
Thank you.
So just so I'm clear on what you're saying whether there's a high chance or a low chance, it doesn't matter because the code says that if there's any chance,
You have to
build
design.
to this standard.
Exactly. That's the standard that we have to hold it to.
Is that per state of Oregon or the United States government or the county or who?
So,
made that?
so there is the International Building Code, which is, which is used in all jurisdictions in the US. And then the Oregon has their own code, which is the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, which refers back to the IBC. And then that refers back to the ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers. So they have their own code. So yes, so it is. So the governing is the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, but it refers back to the IBC.
Question here, Rajiv.
Yes.
So, deep foundation you said would be less economical, to the soil mixing that we could do, soil amendments. Would deep foundations, would those include like rammed aggregate piers?
No.
Yeah, it has
So
to be
the
something
rammed
more
aggregate piers, we can't build them deep enough, plus, so the concern here is. Let's say, so there are two conditions here, so. Let's imagine that we have the big earthquake, right, the Cascadia subduction zone. So that's a magnitude 9 earthquake hitting your site. With like in peak ground acceleration of about 1 G or something. So that's the first condition, so some of the soils liquefy. Some does not, and those start moving, and then they start putting the forces on your piles or your deep foundation. So that's the first thing. And then you don't really have resistance below, because your soils are liquefied. Deep foundation, they have to have something fixed into the ground to work. So which means that we can't use the upper 60 feet, we have to go down to 1,800 feet.
Oh, wow.
And those will be big footings, like 4 foot, 6 foot diameter. Now, the second scenario there would be like when the tsunami comes, now you got this material on the top, which is basically swirling around. So you don't really have any support there. So basically you have the building here, the deep foundation, slab here, all this soil has now turned into liquid. So that's the second condition that you would be designing. And for building structures, in my experience, it has never turned economical to use deep foundations under these conditions.
I have a question. Would you imagine that the soils here on this site are relatively typical for probably the geologic conditions in Gerhardt and just the coast in general?
In general, yeah.
There real data from experiences that shows how the soil amendment works in situations like that?
So let's see, that's another interesting question. So, we have done a lot of soil amendment, lot of deep foundations. But the fact is, we haven't had that many earthquakes. So we really don't know. The modeling is there, the theory is there. We know we need to do this. But yes, if you're looking for real verifications, there is really not that many case histories.
We
So,
should have no evidence that it doesn't work.
Exactly, that's true.
So this is, that system's not being used in California or,
No, they're being used. In
okay, so I mean,
Yeah.
they've had plenty of earthquakes.
Why, yeah, but see, the California earthquakes are not as big as the
No,
earthquakes
they're
here.
not.
They are a lot smaller. So California, it's like a 6.5, and the earthquake scales are log scales.
Well, the system
So-
is working well with that size of a quake.
It should.
I mean,
If it works for
Yeah.
this earthquake, it will. So a smaller earthquake, what happens is, a smaller earthquake happens here. So its zone of influence is probably like 10 kilometers away, or 10 miles away. And it's more like, it's a limited shaking. Maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. But like a subduction zone, which we think is going to shake for like a couple of minutes, So it's more of a global thing. So it's not like the earthquake happens, we only see the effect like in this limited geographical area. We think it will affect a lot more than, a regional smaller scale. Like an earthquake in Portland, like on the Portland Hills is a 6.5.
Yeah.
So that might affect maybe this building, but it may not affect that building. But at night, it's gonna affect all. The other thing we also need to think about is earthquakes don't happen like a 9 and stop, So there will be an aftershock, which might be a magnitude 8, and a magnitude 8 is still 100 times stronger than a magnitude 6. That's what, we are designing these for. So. But yeah, like, actual evidence, we don't really have that. I mean, we hope we don't have. So,
water treatment facility was built with this same sort of thing, the critical infrastructure rules changed. So underneath the tennis courts, we have about 50 of these piles that are holding up 250,000 gallon water tank underneath the tennis court.
Down 60 feet or so.
Yeah, I couldn't verify the depth, I didn't get that, I couldn't even read the plans to understand it as well as I would like. But they are very deep, yeah.
Yeah, I think in, for like Tillamook, what is the word, it is to Cape Mears, I think where that they lost their tank in the sliding. I think that's where we are also built like a big, but that's a pile system, but there's a lot of piles in that tank, you know, the new tank. For the Cape Mears water system on the top of the hill there. But yeah, like Oregon State, you know, on for their new Hatfield Center where they built the tsunami proof building, they did a lot of stabilization and, you know, piling up.
Can you give us an expected timeline if we did the soil amendments, how many weeks that would take on site before we could do our normal shallow foundations on top of that?
So. You know, it depends on, you know, like what we have, what size building do we have, like, you know, it's 19,000 square feet. Something like that, and we go out, you know, so. It might take you, you know, maybe 3 months. And you know, the thing with that is if there's a big enough project, you know, the operator might bring 2 rigs, you know, if you have to like go faster. So. Well, you know, schedule is, yeah, 3 weeks or 3 months is kind of, you know, what I think you should think about.
Is there a particular time of the year that you have to do that?
No. I think these things, we should probably do it in the winter anyways, when, you know, everything is. You know, raining and dark, you know, that's better to do work. And there's less people, yeah. You can bring supplies in a lot faster and we'll see. Yeah, most of the deep foundation work is done in the winter, you know, because we can do the work, you know, we don't really need good weather to do that. Water's good.
I think, Phil, if you want to talk about the site.
Yeah. Now that we know that we have great soils, I just wanted to do a little bit of prep for the first activity in which we start looking at the design options. So I wanted to remind people of some of the parameters that we kind of understood from the community session last time. The setback lines, we looked at the Pacific Power and Lights site, and we're indicating where those setback lines are, but we also identified an easement, so it just reduces the amount of usable square footage that we could use on that Pacific Power and Light site. And then just reminding people that the ridge path is a space that we can't develop, so we can't really unite the two together. And then we have some really light dash lines that are showing an offset about 10 feet from the existing buildings that we're really trying to make sure we don't impede with this new development for either fire code setbacks from the existing city hall or just construction space for the building to be built from the fire station before it's demolished.
So I'll give a quick summary of the community process, because we had a really productive initial work session back in December where we got the chance to listen, hear the community's goals, priorities for the project. And then we had the meeting in January where we presented the draft building program and got feedback and comments on the building program. And we also had the structural engineer to talk about the challenges with the existing structure and how we're thinking about the structure for the new building. And then there was a fun workshop where we had the blocks and got a chance to move the blocks around on the site and talk about development options, what the different scenarios are and the phasing options are for development. And then we did the ranking of the priorities. So everything we heard from the first community meeting, we then got a chance to prioritize and listen to those. And then there was an exercise where we got to rank those. So Phil has a summary of those rankings today. And yeah, so we had 52 participants in the first one and then 79 people participated both in person and online. So a lot of good feedback so far on the process. And then what Phil's gonna do, as I mentioned in the agenda, is run through the development options. And we're gonna basically break out into small groups, talk about the options, have a summary, and then a chance for everyone to give feedback and vote on the options today. And then that will inform our process, because our goal is to go from the 5 options Phil's gonna walk us through today, down to 2. That we're gonna take to city council, I think it's March 5th, right, Shannon? And so the idea is that the community is gonna recommend the top 2. And then those top 2 are then gonna get approved by council and then move forward into design development, where we're going to go through and work through floor plans, site plans, exterior and interior renderings of those 2 options, do a detailed cost estimate. And then that will come back for review and community recommendation in May. So that's our current timeline. Just pausing, any questions on the process and what's upcoming?
Just the way you laid that out, I'm curious, you're putting a lot of trust in all of us to make these good choices. But
Are we the community? I guess that's.
we're the community, but yeah, I mean, I'm
Everybody
wondering
here
if
shows up
there's
as the
a
community?
circular sort of relationship where you guys might have some input on, let's say we go for number 1, in a big way. But that's the one that you guys have all thought, oh geez, I hope they don't choose that one. I mean, these are technical questions that we're being asked to answer, and I just wondered if there would be any sort of back and forth about that,
Yeah, I
discussion.
mean, I think the intent today is to use this group that's here participating to get that feedback. We also have the surveys available for the people participating online today, so there is an electronic way for people to give their feedback. And the intent today is just to kind of narrow it down to 2 that have the biggest trade-offs, kind of this, the biggest kind of community decision points that we feel might be differences between them. And then that's why we're taking those 2 and doing detailed cost estimates on those 2 options. So at that 4th meeting, we will have detailed costs for 2 scenarios for the community to evaluate. So
Yeah, I
today's
get,
kind of
I
the
get
thing.
that. My point though is that if you guys are the experts, and we've spent a lot of time vetting you and putting you in a position of leading us through this, are you going to give us your input in that process so that we can engage in two directions, I'm just.
Yeah,
trying
and
to-
that's actually, so in answer to your question, yes.
Yeah,
So we've taken all the feedback of the options, and Phil's kind of taken the scenarios down to the 5 options we're gonna show today that we think work functionally for all kind of the technical operational goals. And then we're gonna overlay your priorities that we've heard from you on top of that as a lens to help us review and kind of filter that information. And then be able to participate in that 2-way conversation that here's kind of how we're seeing the scenarios and trade-off and get your feedback on it.
none of these options that we're showing today have fatal flaws.
Right.
So we
Yeah.
vetted them to make sure that they're gonna work one way or another. Okay, that's really my basic question.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, we will sit at the table while you guys are having your conversations and give you additional feedback as you need it to help make the decision.
So what if we come out and we don't like any of them? What if it's none?
That's a fair
What if
question,
it's none? Then we go back to you guys go back to the drawing board again?
if we need to.
Because we, as what? 30 people here are just deciding for the population of our town? I don't know about that.
They can make the process.
Some people don't have computers, so there, we have a meeting at 6 o'clock at night, I mean,
Well, like, we're, more good number of people vote.
Yeah.
I'm used to having my consultants tell me their best opinion. I want to hear your opinion of what the best choice is. If I'm having a structural engineer or a civil engineer doing work for me, I'm not asking that person, hey, validate what I want. I want to hear your opinion. What's the best solution to the problem? That's where I'd like to start from. Right.
Yeah,
If
okay.
I can jump in, John. So we went through that exercise last time where we ranked your priorities, right? These are the, I know, this, let me, hear me out. So those are the things that you told us that was important to you, right? So we went through and we assigned the sort of architectural kind of qualities that go along with each of those things, and Phil's gonna walk through those. And then we've ranked them based on what you told us. And so, like I said, we've gone through and looked at them, make sure there's no fatal flaws. But if you want our preference, we'll give you our preference, what we think is the best idea. But that's not how community process works necessarily. We need your feedback. And yes, there's only a small sampling of people here, but that's the best we can do within this process. Is to be able to have as many people here as we can get, as many people online, and then also have your elected representatives weigh in.
So it's my understanding that whatever we decide here tonight is gonna go forward, whether the town wants to do that or not.
It will go to council for their
Council, then
review.
We'll vote it, we'll get to vote again? Or we're through voting.
Yeah, basically your vote today takes it to council. Council sort of blesses it, and then we move forward with design of the two options that you've picked. And then ultimately that final of those two, then this group again, or whichever community group is here, then makes that final decision and goes to council again.
So we're going forward with that, with whatever, the two options,
Mhm.
we have two options on the table.
Yep.
We will have two options on the table.
Yep.
And then whichever one of those two options is it, that's what we're gonna do. Because the city council's decided that, because the town didn't vote on that.
You know that?
There's
The
still-
vote comes after all that.
There's still financing that has to happen. There's still some measure of paying for it that has to happen. And that ultimately, in most cases, and Chad and others and Dana may need to weigh in, but that's ultimately the final decision that the community makes.
So this will go to vote, potentially in November of 2025, and that's when you will have, and the community will have the final say.
So cost has always been a big issue in the past, and so when we look, and you have said that once we narrow it down to two, then you'll do full out cost estimates of those two. But when we're looking at these five options, will we have any reference at all to the varying cost between those five? Because that could impact on what we thought was viable.
Right.
Based on what any of those five might cost.
We have relative costs between things, between the options, and different characteristics of those options relative to the size that they are, the phasing, and whether or not you purchase the property next door. And basically $1 sign to $2 signs or no dollar signs, just relative to each other, until we can get more hard copy.
And in that reference scale.
Mhm.
Will you be able to even just put us in a ballpark, like $1 sign is $10 million and $2 sign is $15 million or? any
No,
reference?
not, unfortunately not yet.
Okay,
So we're still in the process of getting the numbers for the comparable projects that have been done around you. Because if I throw out a number today of any kind,
Yeah.
without context or reference,
Yeah.
everything sort of blows up.
okay,
So we want to do this carefully and thoughtfully. We want to help you make the best decision that you can. But if I throw out a number without giving you all the background history and what's happening around you, no matter what I say, will feel like too much.
so we'll at least have a reference, they don't, at least the most.
Yes.
Yeah. How involved is the fire department in this? The reason why I ask that is because they're the ones that are gonna be living in it, and they're the ones that are gonna be working it. And it's great to have community input and everything on it, but I'm a retired gardener, it'd be like me hiring you to tell me how to mow my lawn.
Right.
You know,
Josh, you want
Without-
to weigh in on that?
Yeah. So, myself and the police chief is kind of going through, we've been a part of this whole process, with this. And working along with the architecture groups, everything being presented is a viable option. As the police chief and myself have said, we don't care, we just need the correct space and time. We just need would like to have the correct things to operate out of. And everything they're gonna present is a completely viable option.
Okay.
Anything they're gonna present, none of them aren't gonna work, if I could say that. Everything they've gone through, they've all been evaluated off of, police needs, fire needs, and other elements that they'll get into that may potentially affect things in the process. They've all been vetted and they'll all work just fine.
Okay, thank you, John.
So basically, the building committee, is the two chiefs and Dan Gold and myself and Chad. Okay, what we made clear to the chiefs was, okay, you've got wants in this, on this pile here, and you've got needs over here. Let's concentrate on the needs, okay? depending on what the costs are for the needs. Then you might get a want or two wants. Okay, but basically, everything that these guys are designing for are the needs, the current needs according to the fire service and the police service. Okay? Those are what are required. And I realize that this thing's been going on since 2006, okay? And people are getting, they're getting a little shell shocked and everything like that. But I'm just gonna say that from my standpoint, as a resident of the town, and my family's been here for a hell of a long time. If we don't do something for the police department and the fire department, then the authorities are gonna start coming in here and they're gonna start nitpicking. And I hate to say it, but, without replacing this building, then the fines are gonna start coming. So, to get an old cowboy expression, it's down to that kind right now.
Yeah.
When you talk about purchasing the, PPE or PPM, is there a price set for that yet?
No, not yet. We were still negotiating. We weren't sure which direction the community was heading. And so we have had some initial talks with them. They're willing to sell to us. They're holding on to things for us until we do. But we've gotten, price estimates anywhere from $200,000 down.
So what do they use that property for?
They don't. They used to use it
So
for
why-
kind of a
why couldn't
substation.
you take it eminent domain?
Well, eminent domain is where you have to pay them fair market value. You can't just take it. So you do have to
You have
pay
to
the
give them
people.
something.
Yeah, so you pay them fair market value and that's one way to do it, but they're willing to sell it to us. We did ask them if they would donate and they're not in the position these days to be able to accept, to do that. So we did give that a shot. So somewhere in between their high price and donation is what we're shooting for.
Okay.
But not until the community tells us that that's the direction that they want to head.
Do we have an approximation of what the per square foot soil amendment will cost?
Not yet, but we will at the next meeting.
Yeah, because again, any of the options that are gonna be displayed to you will require that soil amendment, so. So any of the options that are selected in order to go for us, the design costs will need to factor that in.
Well, with that, I'll turn it over to Phil to walk you through.
Okay, so, thanks to everybody that, joined last time. It was really fun and energetic, activity to kind of just generate lots of ideas. So I just wanted to hit on a few key takeaways. We all felt that, or realized that the site is challenging just with the available square footage. Fitting all the blocks on the site, really going to be a two-story building. There was scenarios that did look at, like previously mentioned, the Pacific Power and Light site is potentially developing. There was a notion that the fire station needing to house the apparatuses during construction of the new apparatus does create some impediment for development. And then developing or working around the existing city hall is also kind of difficult with the fire station needing to remain. And then lastly, there was some potential in incorporating the city hall functions in, which would be a smaller footprint than the current city hall into the development. So we took all those findings and then developed all of them. So all the ideas that we're presenting are essentially one way or another generated in this committee meeting number 2. And then we just sort of like try to merge some of them that were similar, and that's what we're presenting. So before jumping into that, were there any questions about making sure that we captured everything? All right, so this is going to be a series of slides that walks you through 5 scenarios, but we're breaking it down step by step. It's going to be a lot of information. We'll revisit the options after we talk about the priorities. But I want to go through, each scenario slowly, and if there are questions, feel free to raise your hand. Because I think the main goal is to make sure there's clarity. Everyone leaves, this portion of it, with clarity, so that we can make informed decisions, later on.
I have a question. Do you happen to know what the square footage is that the Seaside Fire Department in City Hall uses?
I do not.
Is anybody familiar with that?
That's almost a whole city block.
For what?
City Hall fire. Pick it up.
Yes. Okay, the whole city block, like, you're saying the fire station takes up a whole city block?
Pretty
Yes.
much.
Pretty much.
City Hall is fire.
Yeah, I think they have 8 fire truck bays. Here we're sitting at 4, so,
They have pull through so that it's double.
yeah, so that's 8 fire truck bays where we have 4. They just put living quarters on top for their volunteers and their interns.
More living quarters, they doubled what they have.
They doubled their living quarters and they put that down there, but I can give you, I'll see if I can get you an estimate of square footage based on that.
And what did they pay for their recent structural additions to the fire?
Over 3 million
Just to remodel.
to remodel that.
All right. Okay, so, option 1, we're gonna break it down by steps. And so, Public Works would be temporarily relocated off-site, and then we would demolish the 2 Public Works, buildings. And then, it would be in the process of acquiring the Pacific Power and Light property. And then once that's done, then we would build a singular building that incorporates, the public safety, PD, fire department, and then Public Works, as well. And we would still have the existing fire station, serving as that apparatus protection. And then we would, demolish the existing fire station and then build that apparatus apron. And then over on the right side, in the Pacific Power and Light, that would be the location for, parking stalls and, Public Works, storage. So this scenario doesn't have a lot of, available, real estate beyond, what kind of is shown, on the existing site, which is why it really needs to have the Pacific and Power, site, just to have that for vehicles or for, some of that Public Works storage. Okay.
On all of these, have you looked at your septic capacity? Has that been analyzed?
It's been analyzed to the point that we understand the, like a footprint that would be required. In this scenario, that's something that's kind of, complicated. Here in the southwest corners where we'd be locating a new, drainage field. So it'd be replacing the existing, drainage field. So there'd be definitely some complications with that.
In this scenario, it looks like the Public Works building is off in the corner, but if I remember from those, these diagrams, they was sort of the apparatus, there's like the fire.
Right, so, what you're seeing here is a 2-story, space. It's essentially labeled more diagrammatically that, because it's concealed with, space above it, but the apparatus would open up onto the First Avenue on the north side, versus, over on Pacific Way.
And by 2-story, you mean the height of 2-story, but it's really just a loft for storage. It wouldn't be an occupied second story.
Like this is. That's all.
Makes sense. All right, so on to option 2. So in this scenario, we'd be acquiring the, adjacent site, temporarily relocating Public Works, and then demoing, that, and then building a 2-building option. So public safety building would be separate, but it does give you more space over into the northeast corner for a lot of that, uglier storage type space that Public Works would have. And, the Public Works building would essentially take the entire buildable, footprint. And then we would then demolish the existing fire station and then build the apparatus apron. And so you can see there's now more developable yard that's in the northeast corner. It would still have access to the fire apparatus bays on Pacific Way, but now Public Works would also have the apparatus bays access off Pacific Way.
To a savings, would the public works building, they wouldn't need to have the pilings, would they? Underneath it?
I think we would not have to be built to a separate facility standards.
Right.
And so we would have to look at what the actual foundations are. They probably would not need at least as deep of footings or
So
piling.
possibly,
Yeah.
the savings.
Yeah.
Jack, have you had conversations of just doing a quick fundraising thing for the $200,000, so it's not an issue about the land for Public Works, the city?
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
I know you've been wonderful. We have, and actually a couple of the counselors, including Paulina, has been thinking a lot about that. And talking to some of the people that are out there, so yeah, we'll definitely be on top of that, once we have a good plan.
But if we just start off saying, or you think you can raise $200,000 to get something that allows you to Public Works at a separate building, I would think it's a no-brainer.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
who cares? I don't mind, I'd like to have land so you can do something. Now, that's an option. They don't have to say, it's not an option. You've got it tied up, so you know for less than 200 grand. Yeah, you can control something that now allows you to have a free public works structure that you said you needed almost 4,000 square feet for your public works buildings.
Right, a little more.
Yeah, the plan is to work that into our budgeting process this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, and just for reference, the question earlier, how big is the Seaside Fire Department? It's 16,000 square feet, 8,000 square feet for their city hall, for a total of 24,000 square feet.
Yep.
So is all the parking plan for on the street?
In these scenarios, the parking would be on site. We'd be providing the 7 spaces.
On the site here?
But I mean, the fire trucks, is there?
No, I'm talking about for employees and firemen, they're all the parking.
Oh, right, so outside, we have 7 designated spots on site, but the additional parking would be accommodated from the off-street or on-street parking.
Like it is now.
Forgive me, I haven't been to some of the other meetings, I tried to catch up online, but, I literally just finished about 30 minutes ago, a lecture by Bob Carson, who's my former geology professor at Whitman, and Gerhardt resident as well. He actually just finished, it was a tsunami earthquakes, update of Western Washington. And 2 of the diagrams he showed, and I can provide the part of the slide deck to you guys for if anyone's interested, but the last section of it was, given the earthquakes we know that occurred, Sumatra, Japan, the old one in Alaska, he gave some new data on that. But in each of the cases, he looked at some rebuilding that's happening that has communities building an escape tower in addition to where their, public safety building is. And some are looking much more attractive than the old ones, but I wondered if that is all, anything considered ever for this site. They go about 40 feet high, but, it's a great place. The ones in Japan, for example, can take up to 400 people. So there's some new things happening that might be, we can go up as well as,
Yeah, so you're referencing like an evacuation tower?
Assembly
Yes.
area.
yeah.
Right, so we know where the maximum tsunami high water line is.
Yeah.
And the height of our building, the 2nd floor and above, would be above that. So I think as we start developing these options, that's something that we want to consider.
And how many people could fit on that floor?
I don't think
Oh,
we
yeah.
know that yet. It's still pretty early. Yeah.
All right. So option 3 would be acquiring the Pacific and Power Light site. And as your first move is to build the Public Works building on that site. And Then it would be temporarily housing the fire apparatuses to be enclosed and protected. And then it would give you the opportunity to demolish the fire station and the public works buildings, the steam building. And then develop that site essentially more free. This is just one scenario of being able to locate fire apparatus where it really needs to be and all the sort of site amenities. And so you can see there's a lot more essentially usable space around it, being able to pull that apparatus bay closer to Pacific Way. All right. So option 4, the next two are going to be going off of that last kind of finding that we had of what potential you had if you took City Hall out initially. So we'd be relocating staff, demolishing the City Hall, and then in this scenario would be building a new fire apparatus bay, and then relocating public works off-site and then demolishing the 3 buildings for the public safety, public works portion, and then it would include a smaller footprint for City Hall, about 1,500 square feet. And again, this is just a scenario, this is not a developed solution, but in this scenario, the fire apparatus bay would have to be over on that eastern side of the site. This does not require the Lincoln Power Light property, for it to work and get all the outdoor amenities located on site. And so then in this scenario, similarly, we'd be building public works as the phase 1. And then once you put fire apparatuses in public works temporarily, then you demolish the entire site, and then you have absolute freedom, essentially come up with the most ideal configuration once that's all done. And then you bring the fire apparatus building and public works back in. And I think that summarizes the 5 options that we are considering. So the next, before we get to the next phase, I just want to walk you through. So we're going to go through the priorities next. Just reiterate the sort of architectural value of those priorities overlaid onto these options, and then we'll revisit a summary of each of the 5 options. So we'll have another chance to sort of engage, ask questions about the differences between some of the options. But before I get to the priorities, is there anything that anybody wants to?
Do you have an approximate cost on each of these options? I know it's a rough cost, but do you have anything that would tell us, you know, that one's it's gonna cost way more than this one, or you got anything in there?
No.
We can talk about relative from one to another, but this one's gonna cost more than that. We don't.
Okay,
have
that's
any
good.
specific costs.
Yeah, that'll be covered in the summary slide. I'll kind of have
Okay.
the cost considerations and like Ian said, the relative costs between the 2 options for 5 options. All right.
Just before we move on, for those of you who participated in the workshop last week, do these feel like the options that you looked at and talked at? Sort of different configurations? Yeah. Okay.
And I think we have to remember too that those of us who participated in number 2 have been talking to people about them. So I feel like, while we're not the whole community, we're reaching out to the community. And remember, everybody is invited to be here.
We do have a question from somebody online, but Josh, do we have volume?
Yeah, I can try to fix that.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like maybe that's all.
Am I able to ask my question?
Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
She need to unmute herself.
I did unmute myself. Okay, let's see. So can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, baby.
So in looking at the different options, it looks like some of the access for some of the services are from Pacific and some of them are on First Street. Is there any issue with that in terms of like the public works on option 4? Would that they come and go from First Street rather than Pacific Way. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So Public Works being on the north side of the site would have access off the first. So Public Works didn't have any challenges with vehicles coming in and out of that, but we did, when we looked at it being used as an interim storage for the fire apparatuses, it would not work because of the apron and the turning radiuses for the apparatuses themselves. So that's why you don't see that as an option, something that we did explore, but we realized operationally that was not gonna work.
Thank you.
Is it problematic at all for the residents on First Street? That Public Works coming and going from there?
They already are. Yeah, there potentially is, honestly, you know, to add, the only in and out for Public Works to go back into that direction, there would be more traffic. But they are using it currently, maybe not to that degree, but it would be an increase in traffic.
There could be a benefit because the grade is lower too. You could,
The grade is a problem back there because of that hill and where the fire trucks and our bumpers don't quite.
right, but for public works, we could drop the whole thing down.
Oh, I see what you're saying. There is some, you know, flooding, and we also want to keep as much elevation for our Public Works folks because that's where all of our repair equipment's gonna be coming for to help us get back into shape after we've been knocked out of shape.
There was a question about the water plant. Do you want to ask it? Do you want to ask?
I was just wondering on the second story of the plant part, is there space up there? Is there equipment in there? It appears to be a second story, so.
Yeah, it appears that way, but it's not. It's a high ceiling to fit the equipment in there that's running for us, and so we can get little cranes in there to lift the equipment out and things, so there's nothing up there. That window is a window to nowhere.
Okay, so there's no way for us to utilize that for a city.
No, we're using it now for some equipment.
Okay,
But what about when Seaside did their
thank you.
bump up for their residences, expanded residence? They took the top of that building and kind of bumped it out on the side.
I'm sure there's a possibility to put a third floor onto that building. I mean, essentially, there's almost two floors in there now, but I'm not sure that it's built with that in mind. But it's a very robust building, that's for sure. Interesting thought.
Yeah, I guess my first thought would be parking would be an issue down there.
Depending on who went down there.
Well, if the police
If we
department
sent the
went down
police
there,
down
they
there,
still would
the
have
one car.
vehicles, and then also remember, they have to be able to bring in. You have to expect that they're going to have suspects, that they're gonna want to carry in a secure environment. And then the other thing that you're gonna have is when you have a police station, you have to have some type of way for the public to interact with the police. So we would then have to divide up, we could actually then require another staff member, wouldn't you say, to interface with the public? At least during some hours,
Yes.
rather than being able to use the staff that we already have to serve both functions.
What about public works more down, but some additional things in that there? We could brainstorm about what.
There's
would be there.
There's a lot of underground up there. One of the blank spaces that's in the front hand side on Pacific Way is actually a 35,000 gallon water tank that we use for settling. There's so much pipe and things underneath there, and electrical conduit that goes all the way to the beach. Yeah, there's not much left there. It's kind of squeezed in.
Good ask.
All right. So, like we mentioned earlier, this is a buildup of our community session 1, where we did the feedback and the dot exercise around the priorities. So the findings from the survey, it was mostly in alignment with how we initially ranked it. The functional and practical, essentially slot first and second, and then safe and secure and resilience also flipped, but the rest of the priorities remain the same. And so we took your priorities and we have a slide for each of the priorities to kind of describe what it is. So functional operations, we're wanting to make sure this building supports the specific needs of the PD and the fire department. And so we're looking at the factors of accommodating all the program spaces, maintaining ideal adjacencies between each of the departments, and then providing shared spaces to collaborate. So some of these factors that we're gonna be presenting, like the shared spaces, they're essentially non-differentiators between the different options. So you'll see those and we'll sort of filter through them, but we wanna make sure that once we choose the two options, we're gonna be applying these values to those options, making sure that they're still achieved. But for this phase, it's really just looking at the site, location, and development options. Two, being practical and simple, so thinking about optimizing square footage, making sure the building's low maintenance and cost effective. So the total project cost obviously is the most important thing, but things that feed into that is the total square footage, construction duration and phasing. We talked about foundations, so the footprint of the building itself. So simple geometry and building orientation, maybe maximizing some more passive ways to heat and cool the building, so that we could save some money. Safety and security, so providing a workspace that prioritizes security for everyone that works there and any visitors. So controlled access to sensitive areas, safe ingress and egress for emergency vehicles, and then just a safe environment. Resilience, so we're making sure that the operations of the facility are still functioning after a seismic event, tsunami event, and as mentioned before, the evacuation tower is also something that this building could provide. So community resilience. The departments being able to be responsive and available. So access to arterial roads. So all scenarios, you know, are the apparatuses are gonna be directly connected to specific ways. So that's not a differentiator. Response time is not a differentiator, and then the protection criteria, it's essentially the same. But we're gonna wanna make sure that as we develop it, that we're thinking about those things, like the distance from where the apparatus bay to Pacific Way, there could be, you know, a difference between them. A building that's dependable and solid, so durable materials, the ability of the site to allow for future flexibility or expansion is another important factor. The building being transparent and open, so strengthening trust between the departments and the community, making sure the building's universally accessible, feels warm and welcoming, and then is the entry is at least visible to the public. In the community, so reflecting the character of your heart, fostering civic pride and aligning with community values, making sure the architectural style fits Deer Heart and is timeless, not trendy. So those are the 8 priorities that these are your priorities, and then now we're gonna overlay them onto the options. So pros and cons. So I want to kind of just organize everybody to it. So in the upper right, we're showing the key considerations, advantages of the plus symbols and the minus symbols with maybe some drawbacks. And then this is where we've provided the 8 priorities, and then we're sort of essentially grading them from our own expertise. And then we had the PD and the fire department weigh in on operational advantages to some of these. So, and then in the bottom left is the cost consideration. So you'll see a square footage and then the construction schedule, and then whether or not you have to acquire the property. And if there's a dashed line, that essentially means the baseline is the cheapest, and then a dollar sign or more dollar signs is that there's a relative increase from the baseline. So option 1, a single building, simple construction phase, phasing. So, you know, having the building occupies, it's relatively quick relative to these 4 and 5. Public works is at a site, so there is an advantage to that, but it was a good point about there is some impact to all the residences off of First Street. This site doesn't really allow for any future expense, just because of the tight area that's available. Some department agents or adjacencies are not ideal, just because you're sort of like pinned in on all sides, and that ground floor is going to be kind of what it has to be. And then the first two options do have the largest apparatus space, pushing it away from the Pacific Way. And then it's, it's a really tall building and it's close proximity to the existing city hall might be a negative. And so,
How tall?
pardon?
How tall?
So the tallest, the fire hose tower is gonna be the tallest of it, and that'll be a 3-story element. So in terms of height, that would be the tallest, but it would be a 2-story building.
Number of feet, maybe?
Pardon?
Any estimate on feet?
So we do know that we have to be 20 feet-ish to get above the high water line. And so above that, it would be another story, maybe 15 feet to the parapet potentially, but also depends on the shape of the roof structure as well, that, that can increase the height.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So, option 2, it's also still has the simple phasing. It does have a little bit more expansive or area for expansion, but breaking the buildings into 2 buildings, there would be some added square footage just for the services of that public works building that would need to be applied. So we're just guesstimating about 500 square feet. We've found that there's a negative factor with bringing public works onto Pacific Way, just because it's a really big warehouse and it'd be really close to Pacific Way, and so that could be a downside. Some of the adjacencies are not ideal. So specifically, public works is going to be separate from its storage, and it's essentially just surrounded by residences on the north and the east side of the property. And then this also does have a close proximity to City Hall. So the square footage, we see a dollar sign because now we have an increase of 500 square feet. Schedule is the same, but and then we also have the property acquisition like we have in option 1. Option 3, so the building now is closer to Pacific Way. So thinking about the safety of the vehicle egress and ingress, there's a lot more future expansion available. This is multi-phase schedule, so this would be extending the construction schedule, which adds money. Also has the 500 square feet addition, and then public works again off of Pacific Way. And then same thing, breaking up the buildings, some of the adjacencies are not ideal. So we're showing $2 signs next to the construction schedule, because that's pretty significant, and needing to build 2 buildings separately. And then the square footage is similar to 2, or the same as 2, and it does require property acquisition. Option 4, single building, the civic presence of the public building. We could be a lot more thoughtful about that entry. It's closer to Pacific Way. Because all the programs are on one site, we can achieve better adjacencies. It does allow for future expansion with available space on both the east and the west of the building. This does have that multi-phased construction schedule, so it's an extension there. And then this would be adding a total of 1,500 square feet with that city hall function being incorporated. So the square footage is higher at to the 20,700. And then you have that same cost increase with the multi-phase construction schedule. And then no property acquisition is required in this one. And then finally, option 5, so the fire and department and police department, their adjacencies are achieved. Public works is still offsite, so that's maybe not great. This allows for future expansion. And then we have the drawbacks of the schedule, square footage, and additional square footage with City Hall. And then public works in this scenario is off of Pacific Way, which we found is not ideal as well. And then you get the cost considerations of the higher square footage of 21,000 square feet, multi-phase construction schedule, and then this does require the property acquisition. So,
Where's City Hall on the number 5?
so City Hall would be incorporated into
Into that whole
right,
thing?
yeah, so it would be essentially not anywhere where the apparatus space is not going to be located.
So that's public works then? And what is that?
Public Works is on the right side and the
Okay.
Pacific Power.
I mean, right, that's right.
So we have it summarized on this slide to essentially, focus some of the, differentiators. So what we have right out here in the center with the safety and security, resilience, and the, responsive and availability. Those categories essentially, are, the same scoring across. There's not really a differentiator when you think about those. So we really want to focus on, when we're thinking about the pros and cons, and the other values. Which would be here, and, this is where we want to jump into the exercise now? Okay, so, as John was mentioning, the, idea is to have a conversation at each of these tables. There doesn't need to be a consensus at the table, and that's what everyone wants to vote, but we wanted that dialogue to talk about those values. Because these are our interpretations of what's important, and, you know, talking with the PD and the fire department and the city. But you guys, as community members, also have your own relative kind of priorities. So that's where we want you guys to take a look at, the options, discuss amongst yourselves, and then you'll individually be ranking your favorites.
Okay, for those of you that are online, this is gonna be tough. We're not gonna be able to get you involved in this portion of it. But there will be a portion of the meeting after this is done, so hang on best you can. Thank you.
And that's an area that was. So that's what our. And it's like, once we touch lane. Thank you very much. So yeah, so we don't want to dictate this conversation, we simply want you guys to go. So, right, so you have 5 options, the biggest. The first 3 options are very clear. That's all that should be. There's gonna be some pros and cons. Part of the first 3. Or you can say that it's more problematic.
They kind of like, behind the account. Yeah, it's definitely there, it's like large part of moving. Because like you said, you build this here. Yeah, they next
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So number one is your most.
Well, what we're doing. This one here's got. It actually. I could use.
You said 5, 10, no.
It's right now.
Yeah, there's some advantages. Since you have everything. And I think we're talking. But, right, we have. Right, so you can still build it, that's essentially why I think this is that essentially. You're looking at it more practically. There is more to say.
So I'll give you a scenario. We have this right now. I don't have the insurance. Sorry.
That's a good point, I think about expanding the fire ramp. This could actually be working.
And then.
Yes, yes, yes.
All stays here.
Yeah.
Right. He was still. Yeah. The next thing here is something.
I don't know.
You don't have to.
That's true.
They're always right.
Because there's times. Right there.
What I'd rather not do.
So. Why don't well, the other thing about this is everything goes down. Well, there is.
Oh, you're talking about.
Oh,
that's. You're talking about. Right, so you can, everyone can be evaluating what voted to choose reference, so right, we don't want to come away. But it's.
Oh, yeah, finally, years ago, I thought, still do that. It's another big. I know. That's
Have you guys, vote on your reference?
That's a concern of. They need to get that. So we're not just saying, oh, you're wrong. One that can't be.
I like this one. There's something. Out here. According to the exorcist. And if we make the city.
Oh, you're talking about like community. Yeah, I do. My favorite means you build the colony and everything. I want to go up this thing.
Maybe that's all
Do we have the actual scoring? Is that? So the scoring for these options, or the voting? That's what?
Yeah, but do we want to have a summary discussion before we go?
Yeah.
Alright, so I'll give everyone one more there, and then we'll do a wrap up discussion, and then we'll vote.
We want to hold. We can feel the nice side.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I'll start to spread
This one here's been slightly more, because this bill's covered.
But it's all. It's all
we will do a quick summary wrap up, so if I can get everyone's attention quickly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, folks, we're ready to transition here. So our plan is to just go around the different groups and have one person just share out some initial thoughts. Again, it doesn't have to be consensus, but just kind of what your group talked about. And then everyone has a form, so it's your chance to individually vote, and then we can drop those votes off up here at front, and that will help us inform the community's recommendations. So I guess starting with this table here, does anyone have any initial thoughts?
Anybody want to share?
Well, what we decided on, we have the first section, number 5, and the number 3.
Can I ask you to maybe speak up a little bit so that you can speak up? Hey guys, let's share what the first table sort of thought about what they, discussed.
We came up with 2 choices.
The number one choice being phase, number 5. And the second choice, number 3. Which had the drawback of the old city hall, which we don't like. And the fact that, who knows how far down the road we're gonna have to do another drawing for another building. Yeah, who knows how much it's gonna cost at that time.
Sure. So there's some initial concern about the available future expansion of the first option. That sort of led to those two.
Right, yeah. Expandability. Expandability.
It's the group I was with, do you guys wanna share your? Do you guys wanna share your thoughts?
Okay, number 5. Our daughter, public works, fast to the building. It can be a temporary storage space or in construction waiting for equipment. Buy the lot, land bank it, and we can cap a space to do a public meetings there in the future. It's not part of any bond issue or actually a plan, but we control that for the future. Looking basically 12,000 square foot public meeting room that can be broken into smaller spaces. And something the community really does need. Okay, that's all right.
Yeah.
How about this, sir?
We didn't really come to a consensus ourselves. We kind of, Ian helped us and he helped, illuminate more of the pros and cons of each of the options. One thing we discussed was the consideration of having a separate public works building on the PPNL site close to the street as the first thing people see when they drive into Earhart, a working public works warehouse, kind of space, maybe wasn't gonna be the nicest thing to do for downtown Earhart. So we were looking at options that didn't put public works there. That was kind of what we spent a lot of time talking about. I think given that, I think maybe we're leaning a little bit on option 4. Yeah, because that's really, because option 1 was a very consolidated site, there's no room for expansion, which has a very large apron, which doesn't serve the site very well, known for expansion, public works with jammed in the corner. So, without putting public works over on the extra site, that leaves you with option 1 and 4, and 4 seems a better choice. I think our table is kind of general agreement that line of thinking.
Right, thank you. How about Richard?
We talked around a lot of options. I think we generally favored buying the PP&L lot now, while it's still available at a reasonable price. It would facilitate locating the fire equipment there temporarily. When all this ground work needs to be done, you've got to get rid of the fire station before you can dig up the area to make all these foundation improvements. Anyway, with that in mind, I think we generally favored 3 and 5, with the caveat that the public works building as being the first thing you see driving down Pacific Way needs to be attractive. And if we build a new city hall, it could be a kind of glassed in area, welcome to your heart, rather than just a warren of offices and so forth. So, an information center.
No, I think it was obvious that to have lost the place that we're sitting to save the space to build a new building, it just didn't seem to make sense to most of us, I think. to have that sitting here as an empty piece of tarmac after we're all done, rather than utilizing it. That would mean you'd have to get this building out of here, so, yeah.
All right, how are you?
Well, I think option 5 is bigger. And then you'd be able to hold stuff that eventually they're gonna do, and then option 2 is my second one. And, we talked about where you're gonna put the trucks when, you know, you're gonna put them in the, public storage.
Public Works, yeah.
Yeah, public works, I mean, that, you know, you can always make a nice building, but if you want to. We trust.
Yeah.
You know. Put cedar shakes on it, what the hell?
So this feedback really helps us. So we have 2 bins up front, one to return your voting on the options, and then one to return us the feedback on the survey. But we don't want to stop there. We do have a second activity that,
And before we do, we've got 2 people online as well. I think we have Dee Dee and Dad that were on here. Okay, did you guys hear us?
Which one of us do you want us to start?
You.
Okay, me? All right, this is BB Michelle, and looking at the options, I agree that public service, the Public Works Department on that extra lot on Pacific Way is not ideal, not only from an aesthetics, which, you know, there's a working function for that building and for those folks, and they have to have the ability to, you know, do their work without it always having to be pretty. Also, it's south facing, which is not ideal with the weather. So for that reason, I eliminated options 2, 3, and 5. My preference is option 4 as my first choice, and second choice is option 1. I like that option 4 has the ability to expand if necessary, and also incorporating City Hall with all the other functions of the public service building. It's nice that it's on one building so that they don't have to go back and forth in the rain, which we have a lot of. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we also have Dad is on there.
We have to do anything, change it over?
Yeah, I mean, yourself.
Deb, you have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I concur with BB, and my favorite is option number 4. The extended setbacks on 1, 2, and 3 are a little bit wasteful. It appears that the apron, as it is now, is large enough for the trucks. Number 2 reason is that if we leave the PP&L property open, it could be used as a staging area in case of a dire emergency. And number 3, I think a lot of people are going to have to put aside their desire for this building to be of the Gearhart aesthetic. I mean, a flat roof of that square footage would be a great area for your emergency access for people. So it's going to have to be a trade-off. You know, this is not going to be another Gearhart Hotel. This is a fire station public service building. And I don't think we can get everything under a decent looking roof, even under the height requirements here. So I'd like it if people could just put that aside. I think we're going to make a lot more design headway and get a lot more for it. Thank you.
And then we have one more with Randall.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the question or concern that the Public Works building, to me, could be located farther off-site and more out of sight of the main thoroughfare into Gearhart. I don't know if there's not another piece of property available, but as long as we have to buy property anyway, move it back and out of the way.
Good comments.
Is there anybody else online?
I can't tell you, Christie question.
Chad, is there anybody else online?
I think that's it. What does that say right there?
Oh, Deb. No, I think she's a second.
Okay, yeah, I think we went through everything.
Okay. So for people in the room, they can drop their forms off up front and then, but before that, I'll let Ian introduce the second activity because we want to get the character development right for you first.
All right, so we have an exercise to do today before you leave, please. What you'll see over here on the right are basically a series of images. When you're designing a building for a community, you don't really think about a style of some kind. We're not talking about a Cape Cod or a Craftsman or something along those lines. What we are trying to do is find something that fits what you feel Gerhardt is to you and your community. The other piece of what we're trying to do is to remove personal preference from the design conversation. If I was to pull people around the room what their favorite color is, I'd get a rainbow. We don't want this building to look like a rainbow, right? And so what we're asking you to do is that you'll find the images are somewhat abstract. There is some architecture in there, but we're really trying to get at the character and quality that you want represented in this building. So it is a little bit more of an abstract exercise. What we'd like you to do is there'll be a series of Post-it notes. What colors do we have, John?
Red and green.
Red and green, pink and green. Green is anything that represents something positive to you, and red or pink is anything that represents anything negative to you. And what we'd like you to do is please write on there what aspect of that image sort of resonates with you most or doesn't resonate. The negatives are just as important as the positives, right? We really want to, if there's something up there you absolutely hate, we don't want it to end up on the building necessarily. And so we want you to sort of take some time, think about the things that are really positive for you and then really negative for you. For those of you online, there is a survey. Do you have a survey?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have a survey that is going up online in the chat.
As soon as the meeting is over, it'll go out on the blog, it'll be on the website as well, I believe. And then, again, we're gonna get it out with the morning video of this meeting as well.
Great. And so there's a similar exercise for you to do on the survey. You'll see the same image board with a series of numbers. Please give us your top 3 and your bottom 3 based on those numbers.
How long will that survey be up? Is that gonna be up beyond this meeting or is it just tonight?
Yeah, I'm sure probably through the week at least, right?
I would like to.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's gonna be online. You had a question?
Both activities that and
Both activities should be up for until through the weekend, it's Monday?
Yeah, we'll probably put it down beginning and next week.
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
And then Candace?
Any questions before we start?
We'll put the links up on, we'll put the links out on the blog and they'll be on the city website.
Yes. All right, so please, are your chairs, come up to the image boards, grab some Post-it notes.